Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Strange Mosaic, and I am super excited for today's show. Sometime at about the end of 2024, a video about the Process Church made its way into my feed, and for some reason I decided to click. And it was the best video about Process Church that I probably ever heard in terms of uh, summarizing it, but poking into areas that I felt like were the most pertinent, and also leaving some questions as to what else is being implied here. And the gentleman's name was Austin Picard, and he's here. His podcast is the Underclass podcast. And as I started to dig into him, I realized that, like, this is the person that I wish I had to talk to when I was doing all my deep, dark, like strange research back, 15, 20, and so it's weird to say, but 20 years ago, almost in some cases. And so I've been enjoying getting to know him, listening to a lot of his videos, both the ones he does by himself and a lot of the collaborations he does with Jose. I knew I liked him even more when I found out he had a show called The Morning Dump, because I just watched a show that I had been doing for 5 years called The Friday Morning Dump, right? So
That's
apparently we're both
hilarious.
full of shit, in addition to full of full of all these content, this content.
Absolutely.
So, Austin, welcome. I'm really happy to meet you this morning and to have hopefully dark and strange and awesome conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Honestly, first of all, thank you for having me on. Obviously, that means the world to me in the first place because anytime that I have just the opportunity to have one of these strange and but in my mind, extremely worthwhile conversations that tend to linger into these areas of interest that so many people seem to run away from, if they've ever even been exposed to it or introduced to these lines of investigation. And so, like once kind of like the veil falls to the wayside, and you're unfortunately faced with this kind of overwhelming paradigm shift, right? That you have no other choice but to, at least if you're objectively and honestly reflecting upon your ideas, and it's like you're kind of like left with no other choice than to face the facts and kind of, yeah, entirely restructure the way you view and approach and just your kind of baseline perspective on how power functions, and right, and that, and like I had no real conceptual outline coming into this. Like I really just was philosophically opposed to the state to begin with. I
Mhm.
had had some sort of run-ins for nonviolent drug offenses and things of that nature, right? Which very much paved the way for me and my personal. Um, I definitely I've been on an interesting path where I had to kind of reflect again because I had, as much as it's like I appreciated the consequences that I endured because it helped kind of change the path that I was on and direct me into a more optimistic worldview. But right, it's still the level of injustice that you kind of experience as well, and it's like a kind of, again, it's paradigm shifting in general. And I was a young person going through a lot of that, right? Which many of us unfortunately have that unfortunate kind of origin story when it comes down to I had this inherent rejection of authority that was instinctual within me, and that was something that to this day I appreciate and thank God for, because I honestly believe that is the reason that I am here in this very moment and now kind of pursuing something worthwhile in my mind that I'm very much passionate about. And I think that ultimately, once you are faced with this 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 disturbing kind of alternative framework for how society has been structured, and it just falls perfectly into place as far as the plausibility aspect of it all. It makes so much more sense, right? And you feel like you have this 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 foundation that you can now kind of grow in the right direction, in a optimistic direction, a positive way where you will once again kind of ultimately, I think, find yourself in a better place where you won't fall into the traps that have been laid as far as ideological prisons and that are meant to confine and misdirect and deceive us into embracing bad ideas in general. And I think that all of those things kind of like um, just through my personal individual path, right? I was again forced to go through recovery and things of that nature, right? So I had to kind of reflect very, very much on my own personal path and the choices that I had made, and had to take accountability for my own actions. And I think those things in general kind of lead you into a better direction and provide a more ethical as far as ethical framework that is valuable within your foundational principles that you can practice on a daily basis. And that helps with, again, that helps with every aspect of life. So the propaganda doesn't land right as effectively. You know, you kind of like have this manufactured defense mechanism that is now in very well in place. And again, I'm blessed and grateful for that. And I think that once once you are provided with a window into this clandestine version of reality that is, again, smoke and mirrors, right? The entire diabolical framework was built for deception, you know, and so it's like that is what I'm now attempting to do with the underclass, is effectively kind of pull back that very thick curtain that is kind of like essentially it's it's forcing it, honestly, like this, basically, if you want to put it in terms of, it's sort of, you know, reinforcing that very veil, right, that I mentioned fell to the wayside, and my vulnerability was you know, kind of revealed for what it was, and I could deal with reality in honest terms for once. And so I'm attempting to kind of pull back that very well designed thick curtain to kind of you know, disrupting all of global society just in terms of perception, right? Because
Mhm.
I think perception is key to all of this. And once you've realized that the structure of society is built on, right, this deliberate deception, then you can finally kind of, you know, remain skeptical on every facet of your worldview and ideological pursuits. And I think that is where, you know, you can kind of finally create some more comprehensive conceptual outline that makes more sense and again falls in line with, I think, the true power paradigm, which is ultimately what I want to expose as much as we possibly can, because these usual suspects, it's far more of a smaller group of elite individuals and, right, aristocratic families and bureaucratic oligarchies that are just like clearly the puppet masters pulling the strings, and these political puppets dancing around, you know, just again providing more in line with the, in terms of the deception. It's clear that they're just ultimately performing. You know, that is what they are. They're performance artists that are attempting to,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
to deceive us.
They're
And
very
this is
gifted
why,
method actors, right?
absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Can I ask a question just out of
Mhm.
curiosity? I feel like I've heard you say things that lead me to believe that you are either from Los Angeles or you live in Los Angeles.
Yeah, yeah. I live in Long Beach right now.
So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I actually I live in Austin. Now
Oh wow,
I've
nice.
lived here many times over the years, and I've kind of spent my adult life going back and forth between Los Angeles and Austin, and you know, I too have a history with drug use.
Hmm.
Somehow, which still is a mystery to me, I managed to evade any interfacing with the authorities, and it doesn't really
Nice.
seem reasonable to me that that's the case. So sometimes I have suspicions as to, like, you know, why that may be, and we can talk about that sometime if you want. But like, there is something. So there's two things about the reason I asked you this is one of the things that I don't know what drugs you used. I've, I used and still occasionally used psychedelics, but I had a 15-year addiction to methamphetamine, and like way earlier than that had around with cocaine, like when I was like 19 or 20, right? And one of the things that drug use does is alter your perception, right? And if you are using drugs consistently and long term, you start to develop like different points of view based on whether you're sober, how fucked up you are, if you're with other people. And you start to recognize that what we normally accept as just how a situation is or reality works actually has more layers to it. And you get a peek behind that sort of veil or that window when you are on drugs. It opens your mind to the fact that like there are many more things at play than just the thing you think you have your eyes on. And then my other observation, having grown up in Los Angeles and, had a lot of my most formative experiences there, is that it's not called Los Angeles because of the angels. It's called that because of the angles. There are so many points of view, whether we're talking about the physical beauty of the space and all the different things that are there, or just the different kinds of people and the different kinds of industries and the different sort of experiences you can have dependent on the sort of culture or counterculture you find yourself a part of. And I feel like people from Los Angeles who open their mind to some of these alternative ways of seeing reality really have the best upfront view of it because it's so present there, right? Dave McGowan was also from Los Angeles, right? He's someone in my formative years around research I spent a lot of time listening to, right? And for him, it was, this sort of, it seems this one way, and in fact, I would prefer it this way, but when I just looked from the other angle, this whole other thing opened up. And there's something unique about Los Angeles that in all the other places I've lived in many other cities throughout the country, it isn't quite the same. So there's this kind of full spectrum, like panoramic view you can start to get of things if you are a person with your eyes open in Los Angeles. And so I thought you might be from LA. I wasn't sure because I hadn't heard you say something that confirmed that, but I had heard that enough that I thought maybe you were. If you don't mind, and you totally don't have to, you don't want to. What was your situation with drugs? Like what happened for you?
Yeah, I basically, I kind of at I was like 13 when I started like really experimenting, and then just initially, smoking weed out of a beer can basically, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
I
and yeah, and
do.
then yeah, very quickly I just I was very much kind of drenched within the concept of the ideological prison of the celebrity culture war, essentially how the culture war is inflamed in my mind and kind of ratcheted up and escalated in every way. It seems like celebrity influence has a very key role to play in my mind. You can point to Laurel Canyon, right? You mentioned Dave McGowan, like that was paradigm shifting for me.
Yeah.
I was so much I still have of like a poster from the Doors, like Jim Morrison and the Doors, performing live at and like Jerry Lee Lewis was the opening act or something at the Forum, I think is when it was. And like I still love I have Jim Morrison's poetry book. Like that's how
Right.
much I actually bought into the counterculture and not understanding how much of a deception and manufactured it truly was for the purpose of kind of undermining and derailing the naturally occurring anti-war movement at the time opposing the Vietnam War. It was one very key aspect of it, at least, playing out within that socially engineered, newly constructed, right? The hippie, in my mind, was basically created by the CIA, which is very interesting. At the very least, like you can point back to, I forget the name of the individual who was just running around on Sunset with a band of girls who were essentially they created the wardrobe, right?
Frank Zappa.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
there was another individual who was like reinforcing and like helping create the actual hippie wardrobe that basically came
Who is
from
it
the
again?
epicenter of the
Yeah.
sunset.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wasn't it Frank? It was the Frank Zappa, and who else
It
was
was that out of that house that they were all staying
Laurel
at.
Canyon Troop. They called them like a troop, right? Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
let's
Yeah.
see, what were they? What's the name of them? I'm just looking it up real fast. The Frank Zappa Conclusion. What was the name of that group? Can keep going. I'll find it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just like it had a huge impact on me as far as obviously I was very much influenced by the, late 60s or really 60s and 70s kind of hippie culture, right? That drug culture. I kind of idolized it as a young person. And so
Mhm.
I thought the Forever 27 Club was something to admire.
Mhm.
It was like a very strange way to look at life, but at the same time, that perception was, entirely self-defeating in many ways, which I think is another way that it was constructed for that purpose in many ways to kind of like undermine and corrupt the youth just psychologically, but also, it put me on that path of drug culture, very much. And so I before Drake made uh YOLO, like, and made You Only Live Once super gay, right? No, but that was basically my mentality as a young person, like, right? I just kind of anything I could get my hands on, I wanted to experiment and see how far I could push the boundaries, and that was my mentality, and it led me into a lot of trouble. I didn't give really I basically gave up on any sort of academic career whatsoever. I was gifted artistically, thankfully. I just had like a natural inclination due to my mom and my grandpa. Like, my grandpa was basically the deacon of a Baptist church, and he ran the music in the area, for a lot of the churches, and he we had like a family gospel quartet, and so I grew up as a young person just traveling to these churches in the South, in the Bible Belt as well. And this is very interesting experience, how I've had this kind of like I've had this dual this kind of it's interesting. I've had two entirely different experiences, and as far as my life experience, in terms of living in the city and living on a 35-acre farm in Northwest Arkansas. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it was very very interesting for me to kind of, again, I at the very least I do appreciate that experience so much, because I think a lot of my moral principles were already kind of in place in many ways as a child, and that was only due to the fact that I had uh, parents with good intentions that meant well. They might have been ignorant to the way the just society is structured in general, but their intentions were pure, and and they're beautiful people, and that alone provided me with something that I take advantage of, honestly, as far as just I take for granted often as well. And I would like to point out how much I appreciate and value that experience as a child, as much as like I still came from a broken home around that age, 13, when I embraced the drug culture, right? Which, hey, that's par for the course, it seems, for a lot of people. But still, it was like every aspect of what I was encouraged to do by my parents. They were encouraging me to, yes, fall into place into the establishment line, but also not with their philosophy wasn't as, let's say, um they came from decent moral principles. Their ethical values were very much well in place, and so they had a decent inclination to reject certain you know authoritarian principles, right? But at the same time, very much just a part of the average mold, in terms of like embracing the structure, right, of the current structure of the state and things of that nature. So, they didn't take it too far, right? But it was, at the very least, it did provide me with some sort of I think that's where my individualistic nature comes from, right? Is very much that experience. But then again, I pointed out the fact that I at least had like a strange I had an ear for music, so I could at least hear like tone. I could play a little piano and guitar, and then after I failed drug tests and couldn't play sports anymore, I basically I started this girl that I knew. She encouraged me essentially because she knew I could sing. She encouraged me to like try out for the play, right? The musical that was about to be performed. And so I did, and it actually went pretty well. And then all of a sudden I found myself like in this weird place where I was like 17 years old, and like I had met this woman named Echo Sibley, who was actually a very cool name, but she was at the University of Arkansas, right? Like actually kind of training. She was helping as a voice coach because she was very well trained as an opera singer, which was
Hmm.
actually very interesting because I never, I never dabbled in opera or at any level, but it was definitely like to use your diaphragm at that level is like extraordinary, and so she was very just skilled and a good teacher. And so yeah, my mom arranged this voice lesson, right? So I did a few voice lessons just to get my diaphragm in place and like cuz I and anyway, and learn how to use my voice in in a different way, right? And so
You do
through
have a
that.
great voice. That was one of the things that caught me the first time I ever listened to you is like this guy's got a voice that is made for mystery radio. Like you're probably a little too young, but like back in the late 70s and early 80s, I remember like my dad would pick me up from gymnastics. I was a gymnast and I trained, 5 or 6 hours a day. At like 9 o'clock at night on the way home, we'd listen to like the mystery story hours, on the radio on the
Mhm.
way home, and your voice has that sort of
Mhm.
quality, yeah, to sort of,
Thank you.
peek into the darkness. I love it.
And I honestly, I think that, thank you, by the way, that means a lot to me. But I honestly, um, I think that a lot of the reason that I kind of orchestrate my show, the solo projects that I do under the underclass, like I think that the way that I do it is due to this interesting experience that I had as a young person, because very much embracing this theatrical mindset, but
Hmm.
also appreciating live theater, appreciating these interesting artistic values and and yeah, so
Did you end
she
up
had
going
a
to theater school?
yeah, so basically she was she had a connection to the theater department at the university, and so essentially at 17 I got an audition at the local Walton Arts Center theater play production where they were going to do a play during the summer, and it was all grad students, and then I just got this opportunity, and so I went up there at like 17, and I got this musical theater course that they allowed me to be a part of, and so I was in this musical theater course with all these grad students at 17 years old, and it was a really awesome experience. And this is where I got the audition for the local or for the play at the professional arts center that was nearby. So this all like was very interesting how it kind of aligned for me. But it was one of the most valuable experiences I've ever had because it was kind of like it was such a again, you're talking about a lot of improv, but also you're learning how to present a musical monologue and things of that nature. And yeah, it made me kind of embrace words off the page in a very different way,
Yeah.
and I love that experience, and everything that I kind of felt with performing with like a partner within the context of some of those musical monologues and things of that nature. It's a very moving and emotional experience, right? To attempt to do that in honest terms. And yeah, so that was like I think a huge reason why, honestly, that because I fell in love with basically I had this idea that I wanted to be a director to at a certain level. At least I started to very much appreciate uh, these various directors that I still to this day like kind of idolize in as far as their creative vision. like a Paul Thomas Anderson, or a Wes Anderson even. But I just think that that is kind of the reason that I face the underclass in this way and approach it in this very way, because to me, I'm sitting alone reading through these court documents or reading these various books that are like amazing resources as far as providing like primary source documents and things of that nature. And but I'll just be sitting in the rec room alone, like um moved to the point to where I have to stop myself at times, because like the way that I basically create these dysfunctional relationships with these cases, and it feels like it's definitely in a way it's somewhat unhealthy. You know what I mean? Because I'll just be sitting in front of the computer for 12 hours at times, and then by the end of it, I don't even feel like a human anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
convincing myself, as you had mentioned before, that this isn't affecting me, and I'm fine. Everything's fine. And then
Yeah.
at the end of the night, I'm like, my
What?
soul is broken. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
devastating.
Yeah. So
Um,
before we started recording, Austin and I were chatting just for a few minutes, and actually, the story you just told revealed yet another sort of thing that we have in common that sort of explains like why I took to the way you do what you do so much. I was in the theater, like I was in Hollywood when I was a kid.
right.
And I did, I actually like sang in a movie when I was little. I was in a few movies and a few commercials. And then later, when gymnastics was over, because I got much more into gymnastics in Hollywood, I did stunt double for a while. But the first
Wow.
movie I was ever in, like I was singing, and so I'm a terrible singer now. I don't know how that really ever happened. And actually, that connects to sort of how I got into some research and certain threads of topics. But we were talking about the I don't remember if I said it on the recording or before we got started, the dark rabbit holes that you end up in when the veil gets pulled back, and you start to look. If you're either, people run away and they're the ones who insist on being asleep, or you dive in and you keep going and going, and some of the stuff is so dark. And I had told him, like I was doing math at the time that I discovered what was really going on in the world, and it allowed me. Wasn't that I wasn't affected by it, but I don't know if you've ever done math. Like at a certain point, you recognize you're tired, you're hungry, you need water, but you don't care. You just continue doing whatever you're doing. It was kind of like that. Like I recognize that this is awful and this is like terrible what I'm looking at, but like I'm on the case right now, and I can get to the bottom of this rabbit hole. So you keep going and going, and then, 2 or 3 days later, after you've crashed and then woken up and you remember what you read, it's like, oh my God, what's the point of fucking living? And so, but I'm also really curious as to where this goes. So take another bite.
Right.
Let's go again, right? So it definitely, and you'll sit there. I used to tell people I researched 26 hours a day, right? Kind of thing.
Wow.
I'd be in
Yeah.
my apartment. Most people who are drugging are either on the street trying to figure out how they're going to get their next fix, or they're partying or something. But for me, it was research. It fueled it. Like I happened to discover alternative information like early on, sort of in my meth use. And pretty quickly, I separated away from like all my party friends, and it was a drug. Like I felt like, Hunter S. Thompson or some shit, right? Some like fueled,
Oh,
descent
dude.
into all of that kind of thing. But it
Yep.
is, you get into these spaces where you start it. In some ways, it is kind of like preparing for to do method acting and whatever. Like you start to connect with some of these characters, good and bad. You start to wonder what it was like or how something would have gotten to that place. And then one of the things that even becomes sort of more difficult is, at a certain point you stop just sticking to what you're actually reading, and you start imagining like what else could be going on that is not part of the narrative or the research, because it makes your mind think of all these other things you've sort of heard about, and then you get this picture of reality and how it's actually managed and controlled that is so overwhelming. It's like, again, what the fuck is the point of living? Right.
Seriously.
And for
Yeah.
me, fortunately, it caused me lots of other problems. I couldn't really make good sense of everything I learned in a way that I could communicate meaningfully with other people to do something like what I do now until after I got clean. But I had, about 10 years of really dedicated time focused to looking at everything, right? I was
Yeah.
just locked in my apartment researching. I wasn't making podcasts or anything then. It was just like, doing that. And then on the occasion that I like went out into the world, starting to like apply what I knew to how I observed things out there, which was kind of terrifying. Um, I definitely understand, but the fact that I would not have guessed that you had a theater background, but now that makes sense because you do bring, without pushing it into the place where it's too much, a level of theatrics to it with the tone in your voice. You could definitely be a voiceover artist, but the tone that you bring to it is similar to what a director does when they're trying to make sure they bring their perspective or how they experienced the understanding of these stories or ideas to the screen. And again, we're talking about like angle and perception and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm enjoying hearing about how you came to this place. If you How did you end up in Southern California? And how did you move from like theater to discovering what was really going on in the world?
Yeah, so pretty much I always had a familial connection out here because ever since I was a little kid, we were constantly out in LA because my whole family's from here, right? And so basically my mom and dad both graduated out here, right? In Long Beach Poly and Banning High School, I think is where they went, but so it's very much just in the same area.
Got
And
it.
so I always had like this idea as well, right? You know, essentially I was born and raised in Northwest Arkansas on a 35-acre farm with my dad, a truck driver, my mom, a horse trainer, and I was like 4 years old, had a Shetland pony, out there riding horses since I was a little kid, right? And so that was another reason why I very much like when I found out about Ruby Ridge, Waco, and OKC, I just had like a visceral reaction to it because I related to Sammy, Randy's little boy, and out on the farm like with my gun and my dog, like that was something that I related to. And so for me, it was very much like a level of kind of like it it was very much a red pill for me because it helped me realize what the state is capable of, right? But it's one of the most perfect examples of what your government is
So you were
capable of.
aware of that then when that stuff was going on.
No, no, I
Okay.
found out just I found out basically I came to this kind of line of interest because I was essentially, yeah, I had nothing but issues throughout high school, and then essentially was just kind of like at a loss because yeah, I got a scholarship based on my performance audition for theater and things of that nature, but I just instantly squandered it because I was already living a kind of just a chaotic lifestyle that in no way was structured to succeed, right? And so I remember I think I took like a shitload of Dramamine or something before I went to my first day of yeah, of college, and I was like, I couldn't even stand up, and they were telling me to introduce myself. It was not a very good situation. So anyway, that was very. I was on a fast track, definitely to experiencing some sort of consequences. So at a certain point, I just yeah, I dropped out without dropping out of college, right? Like I just stopped going, which is the worst thing you can do because then you still have to pay for it, right? So you know what I mean? But that's how irresponsible I was at that time, and but yeah, so I got to a point where I really kind of backed myself into a corner, and I was either going to entirely continue on the path that I was on, which was I was probably going to OD or, have some sort of, yeah, just terrible consequence, go to prison for a long ass time for drug offenses or something. It was just like I was not on a good path whatsoever. And so, and of course, as I said, you know, I I was I would do any type of drug I could get my hands on, right? So and I effectively um uh really kind of had this first of all, I had an addiction, yeah, to basically prescription methamphetamine, right? So and then also and then I was hanging out with these people from this place I was working from basically, and yeah, they definitely introduced me to the more hardcore version, right? No longer prescription methamphetamine, and then I was introduced to opiates as well, and once I was I kind of that was that was really my fast track to hell as far as I was concerned. Like that was when I had really I was no longer I lost my identity. I wasn't a human anymore. It's like once you get to that level, there's a story. This is you know, just like something that I'll never forget is like my mom, she loves me more than anything. She'd do anything for you. She'd give you your her shirt off your back or her back, and I'll just never forget that in the depth of my addiction, right? Like she's just, I'm desperate for a fix at the lowest level that you could imagine as far as your character, you know.
I
Um
do. I do. Yeah.
and I'll never forget my mom looking at me and crying, man. But with like this strange, like legitimate look in her eye, like she asked me, "Who are you? I don't even know you anymore." And like she was right, you know? But like that to this day, you know, that just destroys me,
Yeah.
at a certain level. I've tried to make amends. Like obviously, at this point, my family's entirely they've put it to bed. They're begging me to move on as far as any sort of like, because this is years and years in the past, but still, it's like I don't think I've gotten to the point where I can forgive myself for the level of, you
Yep.
know, yeah, that I affected the people that love me, and I think that that's what ultimately kind of I had to get to a point where I was willing to change for myself, but at the same time, at the end of the day, like what really helped kind of motivate me more than anything was the effect I had on the people that love me, my friends and family. And so that alone, beyond the fact that I always had the idea I would achieve something worthwhile, right? Like I obviously that's everyone's goal, but I truly, you know, I had delusions of grandeur as well, right? Because
Yep.
big fish in a little pond, I had some sort of success at a certain level, and I thought I was just, it was going to be easy, you know, and I was very just immature, and I'm grateful and thankful that I was forced to reflect
Yeah.
on my own life choices and kind of again hold myself accountable because that was really how I began to question kind of well, first of all, I kind of naturally became extremely paranoid throughout that process, right? So like I think that alone in kind of paired with right the world experience that I had had and this firm rejection to authority, and then I was very much in a place where I was kind of open to, first of all, like I said, for some reason I was extremely anti-war from day one, right? So that was kind of like a
Me too.
my direct
Yeah.
path into a lot of this interesting research, and so I like discovered um the Operators by Michael Hastings, right?
Oh
Who
yeah. Yep.
yeah, and that book, which obviously was based on the Rolling Stone article that he had written called The Runaway General about General Stanley McChrystal,
Mm-hmm.
who ran the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, right? and basically covered up the Pat Tillman friendly
Yep.
fire incident, right?
Yep.
And I just and then I discovered, oh, I'll never forget, you know, how Michael Hastings died, obviously, on
Yep.
Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night. His Mercedes is going so fast, it just like careens into this a palm tree and just obliterates, right? It's just
Yep.
destroyed. And and like, by the way, it was very strange because the Vault 7 documents, after they revealed the fact that they could easily, the intelligence community could easily hack into your, you know,
Yep.
essentially the computer in the specific model of Mercedes that Michael Hastings had, where they could slam his accelerator to the floor, and he couldn't do anything about it, right? And it's interesting to me because apparently he didn't remove his foot from the accelerator at the very last second, which this is not normal in these circumstances, like in terms of car accidents, even if it is vehicular suicide, right? Which they claim it was, right? That he was so disturbed, he was essentially losing his mind and given up and wanted to kill himself, although he had just mentioned the fact that he had a story that was going to blow the lid off of, right? Honestly, it's so crazy to me because when you read through the operators at the beginning, throughout the beginning of the story, once he gets into the access bubble, the information bubble, into Stanley McChrystal's like inner circle, right, where they had granted him access because they thought he would write a puff piece for them for the Rolling Stone, and McChrystal wanted to look like a badass for his son, right, who was like the lead singer of a rock band and in college at the time or something, and that was the alleged story of how he had been granted this access into the info bubble. And so he gets invited on this trip. Okay, you can come with McChrystal and his entourage to these various sites that he's going to visit, and you can run a story on us, and he'll do a couple sit downs with you. And so Michael Hastings flies to Paris, and he meets them all. And along the in the entourage is this MI5 operative, right? And this MI5 operative looks at Michael Hastings when they're out drinking at this restaurant or bar, I can't remember. And and he says, if you write anything negative about McChrystal, I'll fucking kill you. That's what he just straight up tells him. And
Yep.
I was just like, okay, well, there you go. You know, you have the threat in broad daylight. He wrote it in his book, you know, before he was actually killed. And if you remember the Runaway General article, once it was published, McChrystal was forced to resign. He had to go and meet with Obama. And yeah, the optics alone, because McChrystal, it was revealed all the quotes that he had said around Michael Hastings, where they thought they could trust him. But everything that they were saying was on the record for Michael. And
Right.
so he was just, you know, and they didn't think that they thought that they had arranged a normal relationship as they do with the press, right? But Michael himself had seemingly some sort of integrity, and I think he had also, he was probably very well versed in his ability to kind of sew himself in and seem as if, you know, oh, you can trust me, you know, obviously we can have this conversation without saying that you're on the record. And and so it was interesting though, because there were so many different quotes of McChrystal just talking shit about Obama, right? And belittling him and sort of emasculating him. And so once all of that came out, he was definitely, beyond the fact that it seemed as if with the new rules of engagement that was being issued on the front lines of the conflict and the terror wars at the time in Afghanistan and Iraq, like they were essentially hung out to dry. Like all the frontline red zone right, basically just Marines and you know different armed servicemen. They were all they were all given these new rules of engagement under the Obama administration, where they essentially they could not fire right unless they were fired upon, which obviously in an active war zone, that is very much a self-defeating policy. right? And especially it because you're being forced to go out on these essentially these they would go out and surveil kind of right and surveil these local areas, and then they would come back, but the whole time they're just sitting ducks, right? The entire time that they're out on these surveillance missions, they're just sitting ducks and waiting to be fired upon, right, by these various insurgents. Now, I'm obviously philosophically opposed to the war in the first place, but I am saying that if you're in a active red, conflict zone, and you're under the issued rules of engagement, as far as you cannot fire upon a military age male that's approaching you with a weapon until they actually start shooting their weapon. Now, I have heard various military men say that fuck the rules of engagement. They they were basically firing anyway. You know what I mean? So who knows how much, but still, the concept alone. You had these guys in a mere. It was essentially described by Michael Hastings in his book The Operators as like this essentially like this mutiny environment, right? Like they were in this kind of unprecedented way, questioning McChrystal. Just these lower level servicemen who were just like tired of seeing their guys get shot, right? And yeah, it was very interesting, especially after I watched like the Michael Ware documentary, this Australian journalist. He did this documentary called um uh it was called This Is What Winning Looks Like, right? And man, I'll never forget it because he was embedded on the front lines in these red conflict zones with these various Marines operatives and these various groups of military servicemen that were all just young boys essentially. It was like, man, it was so weird to watch. Like it legitimately, they looked like 17 years old,
Mhm.
and and they're running the tank and they're like strategically about to engage with these legitimate sort of, I mean, it was the Taliban, obviously, but still, it's like you're engaging with individuals who have AKs, and it was just strange and witnessing, them actually shoot to kill, but then the level of kind of detachment from the just witnessing the death take place, right? Like
Yeah.
talking shit to the person who's just this goat herder, who's just like, and just kind of fighting the oppressor, fighting the regime that is has infiltrated and yeah, it's just like invaded, obviously, but at the same time, it's witnessing that where they just kind of let him die slowly, and make fun of him, kick dirt on him while he's like it's the
Yeah.
craziest thing ever, right? And yeah, it stuck with me, because again, you're just witnessing what war really looks like. This is what winning looks like, and it's like that ain't winning. And that ain't winning in any sort of way in my mind. And it's, hey, war is a racket.
Yep.
I mean, what are they doing? They're lining their pockets for special interest groups while what your children are sent out onto the front line to fight for the banking, international banking cabal. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and meanwhile, obviously, um, the it had a huge impact on me when I discovered this book, and it put me on like this path of reading Jeremy Scahill's Blackwater: Rise of the
Yep.
Military and or the Mercenary Industrial Complex or something like that. I
So
can't
this
remember
must
what
have
the
been like like what, like 2013, 14, 15 period of time that you were
yeah
discovering this? Yeah.
yep yep
Okay.
it,
Yeah.
it was about 2013, I would say. Yeah, it's
Yep.
around there. And so I was
Michael Hastings is interesting because he also, and there's questions about, the levels of it, but he also was an amphetamine user.
that's
Right? And
hilarious.
so, I mean, there's questions about whether it was a prescription Adderall or whether he had a more serious situation going on with it, which being the kind of journalist he is wouldn't surprise me. There's
Hmm.
advantages when you're trying to dig a story out to being able to keep digging until you're done and not have to stop to take a nap, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
But I also, and I'm curious to know if you sort of agree with me on this, since you have, experience with substances as well. There, like that paranoia that one develops when they're on drugs isn't entirely unfounded, right? We're used to, like, we usually don't pay attention to most of what's going on around us because we're generally focused on what we're doing, right? Or on the people that we're immediately focused on. But once your, nervous system is, sensitized and heightened, you're able to pay attention to a lot more stuff around the periphery. And there's almost these slightly opaque, but very much embedded streams of information in every situation we find ourselves in. You start to notice strange interactions between people on the periphery that you hadn't noticed before. You're suddenly watching what someone's doing with their hands,
Oh
or
yeah.
noticing that whenever something weird happens, this guy always just laughed, or like you start
Oh
to
yeah.
notice
Hyper
things.
aware.
Hyper aware,
Hmm.
hyper
Yeah.
awareness, hyper vigilance, right? And then it's kind of like you start to track that. And so while you're still, and this is part of how, like, I'm not saying that this is good. I'm not encouraging people to go back to increase their awareness, but
Right.
once you've had the experience, you can sort of take what you've learned from that, right? Suddenly, and again, it explains why suddenly a person seems vacant because they're not solely focused on the thing right in front of themselves anymore. They're tracking somewhere between 5 and 12 other realities going on kind of concurrently, some of them physical and some of them really much more almost just like energetic or sensory,
Hmm.
right, in nature. And so for me, I have, I don't know obviously I'm not buying the official narrative about Michael Hastings. That was
Right.
that for me, I remember when that happened, the thing that happened to him was one of those things that sometimes I had fear of something similar like that happening to
Right.
me, right? Like that some crazy shit like that would happen to me because of the the overlap of things that I had begun to research and then being aware of certain things going on in my life. I'm like, well, what the fuck is this? Like I was first researching this, but this seems to mirror and map up to some things going on around me. And you develop this level of paranoia that is maybe mostly unfounded, but not entirely unfounded. And every once in a while, some strange thing happens that lets you know, like, well, like it isn't, these things aren't outside of the realm of possibility that can happen.
Exactly.
But my guess would be is he really was able to pick up on little things to dig into that the others weren't digging into, not just because they were, in on it per se, but
Right.
also because, and this, this since the very beginning of this sort of national security state paradigm, amphetamine and psychedelics and drugs have
Oh
always
man.
been part of the picture. And, so it's for many reasons, not just one, but one that often gets overlooked is just all of these secondary and tertiary and, layers in reality that are really hard to track in your normal state. But once you had a heightened state, you're kind of aware they're there and you can still tap into it a little bit. But when you're under the influence, even if it's just a little bit, suddenly you're able to zoom in and go right, like right to where it's kind of like, when you were on drugs and like you were out of either money or drugs. And so you needed to figure out a way to get more of the creativity with which one would suddenly
Oh
have
man.
access to the resourcefulness, the right, the like I had psychic abilities out the yin yang when I needed more drugs. Like I could figure out where someone lived whose house I'd never been to somehow, or
Yep.
without anybody telling me the way. And
Hmm.
so that has to be super duper useful when you're trying to dig out a story. And and at the end of that it's kind of like, you know for whatever reason, he didn't. I'm sure lots of other people do that, figure that stuff out, and then get scared and either water it down or dial it back, or
Hmm.
or just use it to try and threaten or blackmail other people about something else. But he decided to go ahead and push publish, right?
Mhm.
And which he may have done that also at a high state, which probably didn't necessarily might
For
have
real.
shown integrity, but necessarily didn't show judgment
Hmm.
or whatever it is, right? So
Absolutely.
fascinating that that's what brought you in. The story that brought me into all of this is also a drug kind of story. And actually it was, I was taking a class in school. I had gone back to school. And I took this class called the sociology of drug use.
Hmm.
And of course, like I was on drugs at the time. So
That's
no
so
better
funny.
way to take a course about the sociology of drug use than to be tapped in while you are. But that course was only taught one semester at that school, and then that teacher was fired, and it wasn't because she wasn't a good teacher or the course wasn't interesting, let me tell you. But
Mhm.
I became aware of a lot of things from that course, and two of the things that really grabbed me, and I just ran with them after I dropped out of school, but pursued everything I had learned there, were the Gary Webb Dark Alliance stories, right?
Yep.
Which drugs, weapons for war, smuggling, all that kind of stuff. Arkansas, Southern California,
Oh
freedom
yeah.
right there, right?
Yeah.
That and then MK Ultra. So
Hmm.
the Gary Webb story helped me understand the whole sort of problem, reaction, solution, and all the things that were sort of taught to believe are the ills of the world that the government has to protect us from are actually created by the government. And then MK Ultra, it was just kind of like a very cursory touch on it. It's so funny. I have a book there. Actually, you can't really see it. It's behind the tennis book. There's like a blue binder kind of book right here.
Uh-huh.
Let me grab it and show you. This is the
Mhm.
this is the book from the course, right? I dug this out recently for a series
Uh-huh.
on MK Ultra. I'm doing with Nish. So that was from fall
Nice.
2005. And it
Wow.
was basically she had just all these white papers and articles and stuff she put together. And there was like in my head, it seemed like it was more, but it was such a small portion of an article in there that was about MK Ultra. And it
Mhm.
just grabbed me. And I couldn't believe the physiological response I had to hearing the term. And
Mhm.
then it was really just focused on the part with like taking Johns to whorehouses in San Francisco and having the hookers give them acid. And I
Right.
understood instinctively that, sure, that was part of it, but I knew there was something more. I don't know how I knew, but it grabbed
Right.
me. And like, I finished that semester. I did really well in school, but then I dropped out and I was just full on into researching. So I learned
Mhm.
those two things, which are really two excellent entry points for the
Absolutely.
research, right? But drugs, all there's not a thing that's happening that the chemical and biological warfare aspect isn't a part of it, right? And
Oh
whether
yeah.
that is, and for some reason, being on drugs helps you sort of tap into what the actual vibe of these programs and projects are, as opposed to just commenting on it from the outside. So I was, telling someone on a show the other day, I've done way more drugs than your average researcher and way more research than your average drug user, right? Which puts me
Right.
in a unique position to assess all of it. And I'd say the same
That's so
for you,
funny.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of hilarious how much I'm witnessing like this hilarious overlap in terms of there's a very common theme regarding all the individuals that are resonating with me, and kind of the people who are on a similar frequency where you kind of like it's not difficult to understand each other and it's very easy to have a conversation. And I'm discovering that basically all of us have had substance abuse problems, which is kind of it's
Yeah.
the funniest thing. Like Sam is a perfect example, right?
Hmm.
Sam Tripoli just I think from day one he resonated with me basically because I saw a lot of similar characteristics, that I shared with him. So and again, my very first episode was MK Ultra, right? So
Oh, that was your first
that was
episode?
yeah, my first episode ever was directly regarding MK Ultra and kind of just laying out the bare bones of it as much as I could and that's what like led me into obviously the RFK assassination and
Mhm.
which was I think honestly my second episode, which yeah, was put me directly on the path to the Manchurian candidates and these strange sleeper assassins and Spellbinder and all these various offshoots of MK Ultra that
Mhm.
are just like fascinating. Monarch is obviously the most fascinating to me right now because I think Project Monarch is diabolical sexual trauma. It's based, trauma-based mind control, and it's how they kind of implement and reinforce the alters and dissociative identity disorder and these multiple personality disorders, and that all of these alleged serial killers and things of that nature suffer from these personality disorders and tend to have some strange connection to a military intelligence,
Mhm.
or at the very least, we're exposed to some arm of military intelligence that was directly enforcing or experimenting in these clandestine operations, right?
Yeah, I've been hearing you talk a good amount about Monarch lately, and I'll be interested as you proceed down the path that you're on, like where you come to in your understanding of it. Because for me, that was also right. Like actually, I'm doing a series right now with my friend Nish, where we're kind of tracking like how we discovered MK Ultra, what we thought about it at the time, where our research into it led us, what we thought about it, sort of midpoint, like where we are with it now, what we kind of think of it now, and I'm doing this to prepare. I have a series that will probably start in the summer that I'll be doing. That will
Hmm.
be a very, very in-depth look at all of the numbered sub projects of MK Ultra, and there will be a sort of stick to the research part, and then there will be like I've kind of made my way through this by like taking flying leaps of intuition and seeing what I can find to back up my suspicion, as opposed to like just sticking to the research. But I say that's what I'm doing. I differentiate. So there'll be basically like a more exoteric part and then an esoteric, which is going to be more of like the mystery of it all, right?
I
But
like that.
um, Monarch is one of these things that certainly that was the hole that I found myself in when I got into like the darkest part of my research. And it
Yeah.
led me to all kinds of interesting things.
Hmm.
And then at a certain point, I extricated myself from that hole
Yeah.
and just, I think basically because I needed some palate cleanser, right?
Yeah.
Started looking at a lot of other things, right?
Hmm.
That for some reason felt connected to that to me, but there was not necessarily any documented evidence for.
Yeah.
And what I found, like, made me have a different perspective on what Monarch really actually is. And
Hmm.
then when I started to do the research for this series, I went digging around, and actually there's not any level, there is no same kind of documentation for Monarch as there is
Right.
for Ultra, Naomi, Often Search, Chickwit,
True.
Delta,
Hmm.
sub projects, any of that stuff.
Very little. Yeah.
The concept of Project Monarch seems to have originated from within the community of people who research MK Ultra, as opposed to documents that researchers are looking at. Now,
I
I
know Paul Bonacci was my main like direct introduction to like a victim who
right,
claimed to have
correct,
knowledge and have been obviously, and all the victims are really, I've heard a lot of shade thrown on Kathy O'Brien's credibility. I'm not sure.
right.
I'll have to reconsider and go into her story at a deeper level, but I've always kind of bought her story, as far as every aspect that I've been introduced to. I haven't seen reasons yet, or been introduced to threads as to why, or which direction I should take as to why her credibility is in jeopardy potentially. But I do know with Benassi, it was just like the Michael Aquino connection, right? That he was potentially running Monarch out of Offwood Air Force Base or whatever, and that
Right.
essentially it was, yeah, his direct connection through military intelligence to like trauma-based mind control
Right?
and abducting children, like the Johnny Gosh kidnapping
Right?
and things of that nature, which are all apparently affiliated with that pedophile underground. But
Yeah.
seemingly the finders, which I think is like a CIA cutout for sex trafficking. I
Yeah.
mean, they were purchasing children from the Odyssey Foundation, which is like just like I'm learning everything. It like new things every day that are just like kind of like offering a broader view
Yep.
into this kind of very well established network, right? But as far as Monarch and the credibility of Monarch specifically, that's always been like the crux of, the direct tie-in for me. The reason that I find it credible is only due to the victim witness accounts
Sure.
reinforcing, obviously, that what allegedly happened to them. You know what I mean?
I want to be clear. I'm actually a person at this point who's become very suspicious of documents. So to
I
me,
bet.
that there isn't the same kind of documentation for Monarch doesn't in any way mean that that wasn't happening, right? But it's important when we're looking at some of this stuff to differentiate between the kinds of evidence that exist for it,
True. You're
right?
right.
And so, like, to me, I'm not a person that requires documents to believe something happened. If someone can tell me a compelling story, and then I'm able to go figure out how technically through drugs, chemicals, science, technology, or even magic, such a thing could be occurred, that's enough for me to go, okay, there's a good likelihood this person is telling the truth. Whereas documents, for the most part, all come from government or
State.
corporations associated with the government, and there's like literally nothing easier to
Manipulate.
to
Yeah.
just create, to falsify, to make
Oh,
fraudulent,
yeah.
right? And so to me, all a
100%.
document actually is that somebody had this idea at some time and wrote it down. Maybe they did it, maybe they didn't do it, maybe they were right kind of thing. So if
Mhm.
someone has put time into making a document, there is obviously thought put into this idea. So the idea is
Mhm.
worth exploring, but it doesn't make it any more valid than the story from someone who claims they experienced something, right? And as far as this is my like viewpoint on survivors and experiencers. I there's some people that I refer to myself as an experiencer because part of what happened for me is I recognized that a lot of things about my life put me in a position to be interfacing with the same setup in the some of the same locations and with some of the same people as people who are reporting having been victimized by things they call MK Ultra or other operations. And
Mhm.
but for me, my experiences were somewhat different than a lot of what was being reported, which made it a lot harder for me to sort of sort them out. But with time and understanding, I have been able to sort a lot of them out. Anybody who is reporting that they've been a victim of something like this really on some level probably is, right? Like they may have the specifics. So like
Yeah.
what you're saying about Kathy O'Brien and about
Mhm.
credibility, like it's obvious to me that something did happen to her,
Yeah.
right? Where
Yeah.
the questions about credibility come in at is like maybe more about what the actual purpose of some of it was, like what the roles of the different people involved were, right? The other thing with mind control is just like they have a program to mind control you, they understand people are going to wake up from mind control and they have a program to assist you out of that and keep it sort of
Absolutely.
contained within a certain narrative as well.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a few circumstances where some of the stories are so cartoonishly outlandish that people tell, and so seemingly made to distract from other things that are much more actually like compelling and well-founded.
Right.
That there's a few that maybe I have some questions for, but even somebody who would make something like that up has probably been through something that is actually part of what the goal of MK Ultra was. Just the idea that there is mind control is part of the mind control,
True.
right? Once you discover something exists, well, then you're seeing it everywhere, and that's like a control mechanism of its own, right?
Absolutely. And I think that definitely after the church committee hearings, right, and the alleged transparency that was
Yeah,
obviously, false
I
transparency
love
and
it. I've heard you say that, and I was glad to
yeah.
hear you say that. Yeah, it's
It's
false
just
transparency. To me, they
yeah.
just set that like they're like, we want you to look at this. We want
Hmm.
you to look at this. To me, like the part that's most suspicious about the church committee hearings to me is that like they were happy to give over information that like impugned their character, that made them seem guilty of not just things that were illegal, but things that were awful and evil. But
Yeah.
if you even read the papers that were discovered, there was a lot of stuff in there that would seem to have been the source of where lots of interesting discoveries and technologies and things like that would have come out of that. And that so that would have been considered like, I don't know how else to say it, but like good news out of a bad situation. But none of
Right.
that was there. It was only things that made them look bad, right?
Mm.
Like, and so
Yeah.
to me, once you have, and again, I'm not for things being done outside of people's consent, right? And that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying
Right.
is like if you can get everyone to believe that we're just trying to create hypnotized murderers and people doing these subversive actions, right?
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
think that's what it is, but then you go and look at the like if you look at what the basis of some of the projects were, it's like this seems like very advanced technology that could have lots of uses besides or not even related to any of that. How come there was no documents found from that? So to me, it was like they gave people this the government is this terrifying, scary, evil thing, which it is, to look at, but then said, but we stopped. Here's everything. The programs have been closed,
Right, right.
defunded, and brought to an end. But all that other
Hmm.
stuff was transferred to corporations, some of which
Right.
literally carry the exact same name as the project when it was a project under the the intelligence
Exactly.
agencies, right? And also, or just shifted to different departments, and then that was like kind of the sort of end of that. And it's smart. It was smart to do that because you don't have people wandering around looking for like what were the scientific advancements and discoveries that came out of those processes and project. You have people
Right.
rightfully pissed off and trying to figure out who was doing it, why they were doing it, without actually even understanding all that had been done and how those things had been accomplished, where they had been accomplished, when, right? And so this is the typical thing I see with, I don't know if it's all humans or just Western humans, is we get really like someone can tell you a really important truth, but if it's accompanied by a very salacious half truth, people will jump onto the salacious half truth and
Oh,
become more
definitely.
obsessed with that, right?
Yeah.
And just and focus solely on that and miss all of the other stuff. A perfect example is like when the WikiLeaks got into the DNC emails through, obviously Seth Rich, but or Russia,
Yeah.
whatever it is, there was like
Uh-huh.
a straight up admission in the emails that they
How
stole the
dare
election,
you, Emily? That
right?
was a Russian hack, okay?
Russian hack. There
That's
was
so funny.
a clear admission in there that they had stolen the election from Bernie Sanders, right?
Right.
And like it was that was cut and dry. There was no suspicion about whether that was what it was implying. It literally said that. And
Hmm.
everybody got really focused on like the pizza code and digging
The
into,
Gilgamesh.
right, digging into
You remember
a
remember the
narrative.
Hillary Clinton email where she's like talking about the tomb of Gilgamesh and like that as
I missed
well was
that one. I missed that one.
that's one of the funniest hey, so apparently she's discussing the tomb of the Nephilim.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the first hour of my almost 3 hour conversation with Austin Picard. I am a big fan of his work, and I hope everyone will go check out his show, the Underclass podcast, as well as his collaborations with Sam Tripoli, Jose Gallison, and more. Links to his stuff is in the description box below, as well as links to Patreon and locals where there are promo opportunities. There's a free week at two different levels on Patreon or a free month on locals. All that stuff is in the description box below. Head on over and check out the rest of the show. See you around. Thanks, guys.